I can't tell you how thrilled I am to introduce the Wiicitaakewin workshops that we have here. It's our inaugural workshop. We're going to do a series of these, probably 2 or 3 per year, with people who have significant national, international influence in terms of our developments and issues of relevance to Northwestern Ontario, and particularly to our college. My name is Jim Matter, and I have the absolute privilege of being the president of the college. And I'll tell you, since the Board of Governors started thinking about this day and the potential of having Bob Rae and Phil Fontaine here, I've had the smile. It's really been year to year. Absolutely fantastic to have the possibility of Bob and Phil here. Bob is here now. Phil is quite literally arriving. His aircraft is arriving at 10 o'clock, which I think is right now. So in fact, he'll be here in about 15 or 20 minutes, and Murray Wahlberg will bring him here. I need to acknowledge RBC's support of Phil in being here as well. So we're going to start our day with a smudge, which our elder, Jerry Martin, will conduct for us. So Jerry, please.
Thank you. Bonjour, Wache, Sego, Washte, good morning. I'm very glad that you're all here and being part of it. It looks like there's a very large crowd here today. So it shows the interest that people have in the discussion and what's been going on in regards to the Ring of Fire and some of the issues that are being discussed. I was telling, do we call you former Premier? Or just Bob Rae, Mr. Rae?
Bob Rae's fine.
Yeah.
I don't like being former anything. I like being future something rather than former something.
Well, that's good. I'm just glad that you're on our side. That's a big thing. Even if our CEO there from Ottawa reminds us. I did this about an hour ago at another conference over at the Airlie, and I thought, well, maybe if I keep it going, I'll just bring it along in the vehicle and keep it going in there, but started over again. You can stand, sit, kneel, but don't lay on the ground. I never did like that. Thank the Creator for this day, for our ancestors, our children, our grandchildren, for the beautiful day that we have, for the life that we have, people that we work with and live with. I am grateful to have these people here today in our institution, our college, to talk about the important things that they will be discussing. For all of you that are here, thank you for coming. And I say, enjoy it and do well. Miigwech, miigwech, woshna. May the Great Spirit bless you and keep you now and forever. Bless you. For those that want to come and smudge, you can come up. Better than maybe just, I don't know. It's up to you. Bonjour.
There's a young lady over here who's quadriplegic, and she has an amazing story. That she is in our film program, and she's made a movie of her own experience. She dove off a cliff and landed on rock. from our community. And her film is amazing, and she's amazing. She's a phenomenal spirit. And
Ben? You're welcome. Good morning. Breathe it in. Okay. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
starting with our smudging ceremony that's here.
Morning.
We sit down and we can get going. As we walk through a conversation, which is very much this, I'd like to provide a bit of context and thank a number of people for being here and the support of the college. First of all, to acknowledge that we meet and we do these discussions on the lands of Fort William First Nations, the historical lands of the Fort William First Nations that are here. And our college delivers programming and supports First Nations that run all the way from the Manitoba border to Hudson's Bay to the American border down to Sault Ste. Marie. And we honor very much our ability to do that and the permission that we've been given to do that by the First Nations of all of those areas. I do want to acknowledge two tremendous friends of the college that are here today. Jack Masters, who's here at the front. Jack leads our foundation board, has been a phenomenal political entity both within the city and also in the province. And you know, Jack and Bob said hi and exchanged hugs here, and that shouldn't have surprised me that they have a long history of working together from both their viewpoints. These are two people who are connected throughout this country and very much throughout this area and have supported the development of northwestern Ontario. And the other one is David Paul Ashkamai-Piniskim. I almost got it, David. Oh, we're close, it's here. David's a phenomenal leader of the Matawa First Communities. He's CEO there, and we're working very, very strongly. And chatting with Bob, of course, I said, oh, gee, Bob, do you know David Paul? And Bob said, well, yes, David Paul is his boss. Well, gee, it took me a little while to sink in that, of course, is that Bob is doing work with the Matawa First Nations, and obviously a very important relationship here, and very important for us in a number of different ways as we move ahead. We're going to start our conversation now. Phil Fontaine will join us in a few minutes, and if you hear a bit of a rustle going through the crowd, I'm sure that's what that is, and we want to make sure that people have enough time to just chat with Bob as well. The Board of Governors is meeting right now at the Fort William Historical Park and is spending the day looking and receiving input and discussions about what we need to be as a college as we move across the next 5 to 10 years. Do we have the right strategic plan? Do we have the right directions that we're going in? And this morning, they're meeting with the heads of school boards from Thunder Bay and also from Seven Generations, and a number of discussions that are going on. And then Phil and Bob will join them for lunch and then continue the discussions on in the afternoon. And again, as I've said, when I thought of today, it's only with a huge smile on my face of, wow, what a phenomenal opportunity to work with great people who have stature on an international and national basis in terms of the directions our institution is going. So I can't tell you how pleased that we are to have you here today.
Great to be here.
Right. Terrific. Well, a brief bio, because you've accomplished so many things.
Keep it short.
We'll keep it. I've got a few stars beside a couple of paragraphs here. It could be 5 or 6, but
No reason.
phenomenal work overall is here. But the first line says, Bob works as a mediator and arbitrator in Toronto. I've never seen you in Toronto. I've seen you everywhere else but Toronto. Phenomenal across this country and throughout northwestern Ontario, and we're doing great work that's here. Particular interest in conflict resolution, First Nations and Aboriginal issues, and governance in both the public and private sectors. Speaks and consults widely on issues of public policy at home and abroad. Since April 2013, Mr. Rae has been acting as an advisor to the Matawba Tribal Council, and since June 2013 is acting as chairman of the First Nations Limited Partnership in British Columbia. He's a senior distinguished fellow with the School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Toronto. Is also a senior fellow. Bob Rae, and I think it's obvious that as the premier of the province from 1990 to 1995, was elected 11 times to federal provincial government parliament between 1978 and 2013. And from 1982 to 96 was leader of the Ontario New Democratic Party, and 2011 to 2013 served as the interim leader of the Liberal Party of Canada at a time of significant restructuring, and has recently resigned from the Parliament of Canada. And we welcome him here as a human being, as a phenomenal Canadian leader, and a person contributing to our future here. So I can go on. He's been a published author, many distinguishes and very well-deserved honors from across Canada. So with that, we're going to have a few questions that are here that we've talked about in general, and then have some time before we hit 11 o'clock for potential questions that you have as well for Bob Rae and Phil Fontaine. So to start off, the UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples, James Anya, visited Canada last week and declared that Canada's treatment of Aboriginal peoples is near crisis. He said that Canada still has a long way to go in narrowing the well-being gap between Aboriginal peoples and Canadians. How would you advise us as educators to help narrow that gap?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back at the college, and I want to thank so many of you for coming out to see Phil, and the rest of you for coming out to see me. I really appreciate it, and it's great to be here, and great to be back, and I hope we have a chance for a good dialogue and a good conversation. Well, this is a huge topic that you've raised, and the question of the role of education. I'm one of those people who think that education is a very important key to providing opportunity for all Canadians, and in particular, providing opportunity for members of First Nations. But I don't think education is the only key, and I don't think it's the only issue that we face. But there's no question in my mind that providing opportunity and providing support and providing real chances for people is a critical role that all educators can play, and in particular that colleges can play. The thing that I like about colleges in the life of the province and the life of the country is that they give a chance to everybody. And I was saying earlier to Jim, that when you think about breaking down the barriers between schools and colleges and universities and the rest of society, and everyone understanding that it takes more than a village to raise a child. It takes a whole province and it takes a country to give people the support that they need. And so there's so much that we need to do, not only in terms of building up the institutions, but getting services into communities, using technology to connect with kids at a very early age, breaking down the barriers between the centers of learning and where people are living. And then when people come to Thunder Bay or come to Timmins or Toronto or anywhere else, giving people a sense of being welcome and a sense of being at home and a sense of being supported. And the transition of all of our institutions, this college, the university, the city, from being white guys' places to being places for everybody and to being Aboriginal communities, is a transition that's happening in my lifetime, and I've seen it happen. I've seen it change. I wouldn't have a disagreement with the UN rapporteur, perhaps because some of us have been living through these changes for a longer time. Let's not forget that Len Marchand, who was a member of parliament in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, and now lives in Kamloops, Len was the first Aboriginal person to graduate from law school in British Columbia. So that's in our lifetime. That's our lifetime. That's our lifespan. And now we have hundreds of people who are practicing law across the country, who are First Nations people, Aboriginal people, Métis people, who are practicing on behalf of their communities. We have doctors and nurses and engineers and people working in business who a generation ago would not have been there. So it's not true to say we haven't made progress, but it is true to say that the sheer size of the challenge now and the change in awareness means that we have so much more to do than we've been able to do, and it does mean that learning is the key thing that brings us all together. I'm learning, everyone's learning. I'm still very much in the learning phase. And feel that very strongly as I visit with communities, and I'm constantly learning what needs to be done and how to do it better. So education is absolutely critical, and we've got to get out of our institutional turf and institutional boxes and think about how we can do these things together and effectively include people.
Oh, it's very good. I'm thinking again in our discussions beforehand, I think colleges actually have a bit of a preferred location in terms of education, because we can easily work with a kindergarten to grade 12, as the directors of education are working with our board this morning, also with universities, and also very much with First Nations education groups, with KCATs that works out of the Matawa communities, for example, in 7 generations. And so our challenge very much is to build that relationship without impinging upon other people's turf. Right, and that is, you've referenced the sensitivities of turf, and it can certainly be a challenge when people feel that we're going places that we shouldn't. That's good. The second question here, I should say these questions were developed by Brenda Small, and Brenda could not be here today, unfortunately. She's feeling ill, and I'm so disappointed. I'm certain she is so disappointed. I suspect we can say hi to Brenda, because we are live streaming this by video today, and I'm sure she's watching what's going on. So hello, Brenda. Thank you for the questions, and I'm very, very sorry that you can't be here today. The protests against fracking in New Brunswick are bringing various First Nation groups together to protest ways in which companies are encroaching on the territories of these First Nations communities. Do you think that the interests of the environmental rights movement and the First Nations Aboriginal treaty rights movement are aligned in these situations?
Well, first of all, let's take a step back. What's happening in the country today is that the frontier of development and the frontier of resource exploitation is constantly expanding and is moving further north and is moving right into the heartland of a great many communities that have lived there for millennia, not just generations, but for thousands of years. This has a long pattern. I mean, Canada has been in this state of seeing the resource industries move into the country for about 450 years. So it is not one that's taken place with any sense of real consultation or real dialogue or real engagement with the First Nations people of the country. So that's the background that we all have to, embrace and understand, that this is a big issue for Canada. Getting this right and doing it right is a huge issue for the country. And if we don't get it right, we're simply going to be entering into a period of even deeper conflict than we've seen so far. And whether it's the pipeline issue in British Columbia, which is not just the oil pipeline, but a whole bunch of gas pipelines, or the resource development and mining across the north of the country, or whether it's the fracking issue in New Brunswick, which is not only in New Brunswick, it'll be all through Quebec and the Maritime provinces. It's real. I mean, it's a real issue and a real concern. You actually ask an interesting question when you say, are the interests of the environmental movement and the interests of the First Nations always perfectly aligned? And the answer is no.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that they don't have huge overlap and huge similarities. And in fact, I think they are becoming increasingly aligned. In this province, for example, I find in talking to a number of the environmental communities, the NGOs that I've certainly been talking to in my current role, I would say that people are not simply saying there should be no development. There can be no development of any kind. What they are saying is that development has to be sustainable and it has to be done in ways that protect the environment. And we have to understand that building enormous mines and huge changes in infrastructure and massive roads or railways or whatever they may be will have a significant dramatic impact on parts of the country and the province that have not been developed, but that have been the traditional homeland and the traditional economic homeland of the First Nations people. I think this is one of the key issues facing the country right now, is how do we get this right? How do we do it? And it's not about saying am I pro or anti-development, it's about saying what kind of development, how do we do it, and how do we engage with people, and how do we make sure that for the first time, literally the first time in our history, First Nations people are able to receive the necessary and appropriate benefit from the development that's taking place. That's the key issue. How do you protect the land, and how do you make sure that First Nations people actually benefit from the development? I mean, let's not forget, why was Treaty 9 signed in 1905? Treaty 9 was signed because Ontario and Canada decided that they needed to have legal certainty about how those two governments could take charge of the resource, mineral, and forestry development in Northern Ontario. And they negotiated the deal between themselves, and then they took that deal, one piece of paper, and took the deal and said to those who would come along the Ogoki and along the Albany and along the Attawapiskat rivers and say, sign here. And people often couldn't read what they were signing, but they put an X, held the pen. The pen was held by somebody else, they held the pen was moved. That's not exactly sort of informed consent. So what you have is, among First Nations people, a completely different interpretation of the meaning of the treaties. So a treaty is supposed to bring people together to say, we have an agreement and we both agree on what the agreement means. What the treaties have come to mean is, there is a treaty, because there is such thing as a treaty, and people talk about treaty rights and inherent rights, and that wording is now contained in our Constitution. But the understanding that First Nations people have about what the treaty was all about is completely different than the understanding that governments and companies have. And that's why we're into this period of conflict. So the conflict that took place last week in New Brunswick is now going to court. And there will now be a long discussion in court as to what exactly were the rights, because New Brunswick people are treaty people, and they have a treaty. They're trying to figure out what did it mean, and what rights does it give them. And that's where we are to some extent now in Ontario, because the process that Mr. Iacobucci and I are now starting and are engaged in on behalf of the Tribal Council members of Matawa, the chiefs of Matawa, and the government of Ontario, is really about saying, what is the nature of this relationship today? And how do we actually ensure that whatever development takes place, first of all, is environmentally sustainable, benefits the communities, and is based on genuine, informed consent by all who are involved. People understand exactly what is being proposed and what is being agreed to. And that is the nature of the challenge, and it's a very exciting one, but it's not about are you for or against X or Y. It's about well, tell me more about what X or Y actually is, and tell me how you intend to do this, and how do you are you going to make sure that the same kind of environmental damage that's been done in the past will not be done again? Tell me how that's going to happen. And if we're not satisfied that it can't happen, then obviously people will have a particular point of view. But that's really what the nature of the discussion is all about.
I think it's an incredibly exciting time from that regard, and at the same time, we didn't know this would occur this week, but yesterday the federal government rolled out what its proposal is for a First Nations Education Act, and I have to admit, well, at least in my knowledge, virtually no consultation at all. What are your thoughts? Where do you think this will go? My understanding from earlier today is that there's, and I think rightfully so, great concerns are being raised by First Nations communities around the process, let alone the content of what's been rolled out.
Well, I mean, I'm trying not to revert to my partisan past. And so this isn't question period, and I'm not in the House of Commons, and
Oh, it could be.
I'm not the leader of the Liberal Party in denouncing the government of the day. I have a different role to play. But I think that the sad part for me is that we've had a lot of opportunity to learn from experience in this area. And I don't see a sign that the federal government has actually learned. You know, there will be elements of any legislation which you say, yeah, that's actually okay. And the government will say what we're trying to do is give greater responsibility to First Nations for education and provide for means by which they can do that. But there are two issues. One is money and resources. And the first thing everybody here has to know that there isn't a school in the First Nations communities that gets anywhere near the same per capita support as the schools in the Thunder Bay School Board do. There isn't one. And that's a disgrace. And it's disgraceful that we don't have the resources and we don't have the kind of focus and attention that we need. And it is something that is just a national scandal that continues to take place. And there's no mention of this anywhere in the legislation, no mention of it at all. And the second big problem is that the federal government's view is, okay, we'll set up all these different arrangements that will be, quote, flexible, but if the schools fall behind where the results are supposed to be for the neighboring white communities, to put it bluntly, then we have the right to move in and take over the schools, which is just the Indian Act all over again. It's exactly the problem with the Indian Act, which is that the federal government is treating Aboriginal communities like developing country, like a colonial situation where you say, well, if you guys can't run this, we'll run it for you. It's paternalistic. It's not going to work. It has all the same recipes for disaster that we see in the Indian Act administration of First Nations communities. It's all the same problems. Having said that, I do think the one thing that everyone is preoccupied with is improving accountability and improving performance and really trying to get at the root question of how do we make sure these schools are better and how do we make sure that we get better results. I think most of us have concluded that the way you get better results is by giving real, not just greater, but giving responsibility to the First Nations for education. And then First Nations will have to have the same transparency and accountability for how they provide education as everybody else, because that's the way you do it. And results will be there, and results will be public, and people will see. But everyone has to understand. Anybody, I mean, I can see many of the audience here come from First Nations and will know what I'm talking about. Phil, you're allowed to come up here now.
Please join us. Please join us. We'll introduce you. Yes, very much. Thank you very much. Very good. Please. Bob's been doing fairly well by himself, and I'm sure he could do it.
It's going to be hard for me to accept that there's another gray-haired individual on the platform.
Why don't we continue on, and I'll introduce Phil.
You got your mic on there?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, that's good.
There you go.
Welcome.
Good.
Well, I'll stop talking then.
No, gosh.
We're talking about the First Nations Education Act. I was saying that I thought it was a brilliant piece of work by Mr. Harper.
I'm getting off the stage. No.
We were just talking about the First Nations Education Act, and I was saying that it looks to me as if the government is repeating all the same mistakes that they made in bringing in the Indian Act 150 years ago, that there just isn't an understanding that First Nations are looking for real accountability and real responsibility for education, and that isn't what the Act is all about.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. I think that's absolutely true. But what First Nations leaders and communities and First Nations education systems are looking for really is money. Yeah. And our students have been shortchanged, severely underfunded for years and years. And that's really the crux of the matter. And we're never, even with the best system in place, all kinds of new regulations and oversight, if we don't have the money, we're never going to be able to catch up.
No, it's an absolutely huge issue, and I do welcome you. Thank you. We didn't even give you 30 seconds to catch your breath before we were asking you questions overall, but welcome. Welcome to Thunder Bay, Northwestern Ontario, and I thank Murray Wahlberg and Royal Bank for supporting you being here. It's a terrific piece. And for those who don't know Phil, and there may be one or two, but Phil is a special advisor to the Royal Bank of Canada and to Norton Rose, serves as a director for numerous private and public companies, including Next Alternative, Chieftain Metals, and Avalon Rare Metals. Mr. Fontaine served as the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations for an unprecedented 3 terms. And I'll say this, almost every week I'm seeing, actually both of these gentlemen, and Phil particularly, profile in a national context, honors, but also the work that you're doing for advocacy. I think one of the greatest pieces we're doing here today is to increase the voice of the issues that are here, and you do that both very, very effectively. So thank you very, very much for being here. We do have a couple of questions that we're walking through, and we'll take a few more time and do those, and then we'll open to the floor for questions as well. What are you witnessing, and what do you see on your activities across Canada with interactions and your interactions with Aboriginal youth in Canada? It is the largest growing demographic that's here in Canada. It is a significant influence. In our discussions in Ottawa, the National Association of Colleges met there on Monday talking about the skills shortage. Often it was Aboriginal youth that was looked to in terms of helping contribute to having people with skills who can move into those jobs right on a national basis. Do you see that as an opportunity, the growth of Aboriginal youth, or what do you see as the opportunities that we have?
Well, certainly it ought to be viewed as an opportunity. Aboriginal youth represent very significant potential, but we've been unable to realize that potential, and I reference one reason for that. Our students have been treated unfairly because governments have been unwilling to apply fair funding to our schools, and so too many of our young people, too many of our students miss out. And so one shouldn't be surprised that we don't fare as well as the mainstream student population. And one of the unfortunate consequences of that is that we're losing far too many of our young people. And not to be too down on this, but all one has to do is look at the prison system, federal institutions, provincial institutions. The inmate population is getting younger and younger and younger, and a lot of that has to do with the our young people being captured by the justice system in a way that doesn't reflect the potential and in fact the very strong interest on the part of our people to emerge from where we've been for a long time, which is not enough hope and the despair that has creeped in or in too many of our communities, and that's not a healthy situation. But on the other hand, you see, I don't want to be too cast too negative a pall over this thing, because in fact we've done very, very well in spite of these challenges. For example, in a 10-year period, 1996 to 2006, the creation of new businesses increased by 85%. In that period, 37,000 businesses were created that are owned and managed by our people. And many of these businesses were owned and managed by young people, right? And so that speaks to the need to do better than we've managed up to now.
Actually, when we first met, it was an Aboriginal Business Awards, and we're honoring a variety of those young entrepreneurs that were doing absolutely fantastic work. So what strikes me too, and this is when I fly into some of our northern communities in northwestern Ontario, the remarkable difference between some of the communities. And it all depends, I think, on leadership, that long-term leadership and that contribution back. How do we further develop leadership in communities, especially with youth? That I think to me will define the future, is the leadership that is coming from youth. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be on a platform with Phil again. We did this a few months ago in Winnipeg, so it's great to be able to do it again. It's a wonderful opportunity. We end up not having any violent disagreements about anything, so it's very dull for you, but it's very good for us, so it's good. But I think just to reinforce what Phil has said, and I said a little bit of the same thing before, is that it's really about how you look at life, as whether you see the glass that's got some water in it or doesn't have any water in it at all. I mean, you could go on reserve today, go to a community today, and you could come away just feeling completely overwhelmed by the challenges, the oxycodone addiction, the problems the kids are having, the parents are having, the not a lot of really positive activity taking place. But there's some, and you have to work with what's there. You have to work with what's positive and constructive. And we also have to recognize that all of our major cities in the country today have become big Aboriginal communities. The change in the nature of the Aboriginal population in the country is not just the fact that if you go on reserve, half the population's under the age of 25, and you've got a dramatic younger population than in the rest of the country. But it's also that the First Nations communities are moving and are living in different ways in different places. So what we have to recognize is that we are becoming something which we've always been, but the majority population has never seen itself this way. But we are becoming an Aboriginal country. And that is something to celebrate. If I may say so, this college is becoming an Aboriginal college.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're seeing that. We're seeing it in every way. When I met with the mayor a few months ago, he told me, he says, Thunder Bay is an Aboriginal city now. And I said, well, that's great to hear you say it. It's actually been an Aboriginal city for a long time. But it's like it's taken a long time for everybody to say, yeah, this is who we are. And so we have to find more ways of celebrating that and more ways of really recognizing it. And I hope in Thunder Bay, for example, I hope we can do more to have Aboriginal centers and Aboriginal places where people say, yeah, this is our home, and where kids who come in grade 9, because kids are coming off reserve here for grade 9. Many of the communities in Nan don't have high schools, and so they come here for high school, or they go to Geraldton for high school, they go to Timmins for high school, they go to Sudbury for high school. Well, you're 13 years old, you're coming into a big city, as Jim was saying, it's like going to New York City. It's great, but it's also scary, and you get into all kinds of stuff, and you got to be supported, and you've got to be welcomed, and you've got to be nurtured, and we've got to think about what all this means. So the potential to develop leadership is, yes, it's very much within the communities, and it's also very much within our cities. And it's so important for us to see this as the way forward. In the next generation, the leadership on negotiations will not be coming from old white guys who used to be premier. It won't be. It will be coming from within the First Nations communities. And to a great extent it is now. It already is. It's there. First Nations lawyers and advocates and people who are doing the work that needs to be done. And encouraging the leadership. Same thing true with education. The big challenge we face in Aboriginal education on reserve is that teachers don't stay for very long, and they come in from outside, and they come from outside for a few months or a year or two and then leave. You can't get a good education that way. You can't do it. You can't build a strong sense of educational community. I mean, many of us went to schools where we knew our teachers our whole lives from K to 12. We knew who our teachers were, we knew where they lived, we knew what they did. They knew us, they knew when we were getting into trouble. They'd call our parents up and say, you know, he's gone off a bad way, we got to get him back in here. That doesn't happen in First Nations communities, a lot of First Nations communities, because we don't have the infrastructure, the training. So this generation, your generation of kids, are going to go back, I hope, go back and learn and participate, engage in improving the lives of communities. And that's what will make it happen. That's what will develop the leadership. And the other thing is we need to break down this barrier between the non-Aboriginal community and the Aboriginal community. We need people to understand what reserve life is like and understand why it's important for people to remain connected to their land and remain connected to their way of life, and respect that, and respect something. I mean, one of the things that made me maddest this year was a Toronto Star columnist who's an intelligent guy. He said, you know, the Cliffs mine is going to be developed in the middle of nowhere. And I phoned him up and I said, how outrageous a comment is that? The middle of nowhere? It's just a few miles south of Webequie. Webequie's not nowhere. Webequie is somewhere. Webequie is a real place with real people who live in real houses and real homes, and this has been their homeland for, hey, thousands of years. So how can anybody in Canada call that nowhere? It's not nowhere, it's somewhere. Everywhere in Canada is somewhere. And that feeling has to be reinforced in all of our major institutions. The Royal Bank and the Government of Canada, everywhere has to understand that everywhere in Canada is somewhere. And it's home to some people, and it is home to the First Nations people.
Phil, your thoughts on Aboriginal youth and leadership?
Well, one of the things we ought to do, and do it better, is celebrate success and achievements. Because without a doubt, success and achievement is really very important. It's important for our young people to know and recognize success, and we don't do that often enough. And so our young people are not exposed to positive outcomes and things that are important to celebrate. And there's much out there. In spite of all of these challenges that we face, and too often we have a tendency to focus on the negative and what's wrong. And I've been guilty of that. I mean, I've been involved in public life for 40 years. And a large part of that life experience has been talking about the things that are considered problems in our communities, and so what happens there is we forget that there's some incredibly important and positive things that are happening in our community. For example, in 1950, I mean, we may have had 10 Indian students in university in the entire country.
That's right.
And so in the space of 30 years, that number has jumped up to close to 30,000. And that's an achievement that not only is with the First Nation community, it's a Canadian success story. But if we were, and I'll go back to this point, and I'm going to say this as often as I can, if we were funded fairly, if we were funded at the same level as public schools, that number ought to be 90,000, right? And so can you imagine if we had 80 or 90,000 First Nation students or Aboriginal students in universities and colleges, the difference that would make not just in our communities, but the entire country. It would be phenomenal. Yeah. And so we're shortchanging ourselves, right? When we treat First Nation communities the way successive governments have done. Except for Bob's time as premier.
He's actually right about that.
That's terrific. We have a few minutes left here, and I'd ask, are there questions from the floor, from the people who are here? And I'm not sure, I'm going to look to our audiovisual people. Do we have a microphone for people? We do. Jennifer has it over here. So is there a question that someone out here would like to ask for Phil or Bob? Yeah. Sure.
Thank you. Bob, I got a little bone to pick with you. A number of years ago back in Fort Francis, you were running for premier and you came down and I came up to you and I wanted to ask you a question and you didn't take my question. Yeah. Well, so guess what? Now you can answer my question. My question is, yesterday on the news, there were two pieces that came on CTV News. One was that here, the education system in the schools for Aboriginal people, that we've got to teach more about the Aboriginal culture. And Ontario needs to do that a little bit better, and we need to teach about the Native culture. The next piece that came on was about how the federal government, where the minister wants to come into the Native reserves and say, okay, this is how you're going to teach it. This is the curriculum that you're going to teach. You're going to do it our way. And you're going to follow our curriculum. My question is this: what does politicians in Ottawa and Toronto have to do to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes of the past, where we respect the Native community and we come and we say, okay guys, teach us your culture, let's do it the way you want to do it, and respect it, instead of the bureaucrats coming in and saying, okay, do it our way. So what do we have to do to change so that we don't repeat the past?
Well, I think that's the key question. I mean, we actually have a big opportunity. I think Premier Wynne, if I may say so, really gets it. And what she's talking about is how the entire curriculum for the province has to reflect who we all are, and it has to be inclusive. And when I went to public school a few years ago, we didn't learn anything about First Nations life. Oh, we learned about Christopher Columbus, and we learned about John Cabot, and we learned about Champlain, and we learned about, you know, when Canada started.
Right. 1608.
But we didn't learn about when, you know, who was there when they got there. And that has taken me a journey on my own to try to figure out, you know, how it all happened. So I'm continually learning all the time about the whole country and about the whole experience of the country. And Premier Wynne is saying this has got to be in our school system, because we're not teaching kids about what the country's all about. What the federal government is trying to do is, I think they are at risk of committing a historic mistake, which is the same mistake we've made before, which is that you can run the school system out of Ottawa, and you can dictate the standards out of Ottawa, and you can simply take over schools that aren't running properly out of Ottawa. And I think that's a huge mistake. I agree with Phil on the funding issue 100%. And in fact, before you got here, I even said it, so, and I've got witnesses here who say I said it. But it is absolutely an issue about resources, but it's also an issue about self-government. And this is not going to work if it's seen as a top-down exercise that comes out of Ottawa that tells people how to run their schools. It isn't going to work. We do always have to be conscious of the fact that whatever school you're going to as a kid, and your parents are entitled to know how are you doing, and are you succeeding, and what are the outcomes of what your schools have done. One of my predecessors as leaders of the Liberal Party, Paul Martin, has funded out of his foundation as funding a school outside of, in southwestern Ontario, for First Nations kids, just to show what you can do when you have the right kind of funding, and you have the right kind of focus, and you have the right kind of attention being paid. And it's not about saying we're not going to have any tests, we're not going to have any standards. It's about saying, no, we're going to have tests and standards, but we're going to devise a curriculum that works. Let me give you one just to conclude, one very practical example. When I travel north to Nibinamik or to Neskantaga or any of the communities, the fly-in communities in the northern part of Matawa, most of the elders, all of the elders, and a good part of the community would much prefer to be talking to me in Ojibwe. But they can't. I don't understand it. I never had an opportunity as a kid to learn First Nations languages. It was never offered to me. Nobody said, you can go, you can start now learning this. This is a Canadian language, you should learn it. And so we have this huge cultural gap now. I mean, how many teachers in the school are able to speak to kids in Ojibwe or in Oji-Cree or in Cree? Hardly any can do that. So these are huge things we've got to overcome, but we can overcome them. Other countries have done it. We can do it. These things are absolutely doable, but we have to commit ourselves as a country to saying, this is what we're going to do. And I think changing the education system is very exciting, but it's hard to do, but it has to be done. But I don't think the federal government is doing it the right way. And the practical suggestion I would make to the federal government is take your legislation and table it as a draft document and say to the House of Commons committee, go out and discuss this document with everybody. Lead the consultation with the First Nations. And let what emerges be a genuine consensus that emerges among the First Nations leadership as to what should happen. And then make that the legislation. The way they're doing this is not the right way to do it.
Phil, any thoughts? So the question wasn't to you, but it...
Well, he did not answer a question 24 years ago.
The point Bob makes, what we teach our young people is of critical importance. And he's absolutely right. We've shortchanged ourselves when, in the way we've, for one thing, taught history. It's there's a significant gap there that needs to be addressed, and one of the ways we could do that, of course, is to make it mandatory or compulsory that every student, before they're able to graduate from high school, be required to take a course in Native Studies or Native History, and at the university level as well, before one can graduate with an undergraduate degree, that they be required to take a course in Aboriginal history, Native Studies, or something closely approximating that. So that's one thing. I think that's really very important. But and I agree that language is key, right? And it's absolutely true. There are other places in the world where languages, for example, Hebrew, that was dormant for 2,000 years in Israel, is now the official language, the language. And so if it's possible to revive and retrieve a language in place like Israel, why couldn't we do the same here? Because we are in a very difficult spot here as a country, but particularly as First Nations people. There are 55 Indigenous languages spoken in Canada. 52 of those languages are in various stages of disappearing. Some are on the verge of extinction. And once the language disappears here, an Indigenous language disappears, it disappears forever, because this is our homeland. And so the languages here were born here and they belong here. And I want to make one quick note here. One of the very first decisions, and this decision I think is mean-spirited, that was that took effect with the current government, was to delete the commitment to $172 million for Indigenous languages, even before Kelowna was cast aside. Very first decision. I remember receiving a call, I was National Chief, from then Minister Bev Oda, to tell me that the commitment that was in place of $172 million for Indigenous languages,
Stepped aside.
gone.
Well, language is incredibly important, and I know that within our programs, what's interesting is within the programs at college, we're placing Aboriginal learning outcomes, and some of them involve directly understanding language and the history of that language as well as a critical element to honor the language that is there, but also honor the traditions of the First Nations that are throughout northwestern Ontario. You know, it's 11 o'clock, and I have to admit the last hour has absolutely disappeared here. We've gone by this remarkably quickly. Is there one final question we might have from the floor here? But we do need, Sue's telling me to wrap it up. No.
No, let's take a couple of questions.
Oh, okay, so we have some time. All right, yes, please. It's good. It's usually you're telling me to wrap it up, but yeah, okay. That's good.
Well, is it working?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
No. Okay,
Good guy.
I'm Senator Bob McKay. I'm a senator with the Métis Nation of Ontario. I'm also an elder with Lakehead University, the medical school, Lakehead Board of Education. And what I'm going to ask you about now, I'm an elder also with an advisory committee with the City of Thunder Bay. And we were discussing, and we have a real problem in Thunder Bay here. And it's, what do we do with the people coming in out of the north, moving into Thunder Bay? Because there's a real social problem here. So I'd like your opinion. What can the city do to help eliminate this problem that we have probably right across the country, actually? And we sat down and many times we tried to discuss what can we do to help to welcome the Aboriginal people here. Well, I'm an Aboriginal myself, but that's okay. But so I'd like to have your opinion. What is other cities doing in Canada or North America or around the world to fight poverty and all this discrimination and stuff that is happening right here on the local level? Like you said, Phil, about the prison system. I've been out there and I've counted them, and 90% are young Aboriginals. So it's an honor for me to be here, and I thank you people for being here today, and I'd like your response. Thank you.
You want to start, Phil?
You start.
Go.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Thank you very much for your question. Well, I think the first thing is simply to say the way you put it, which is, what do we do to welcome people? And the answer is, we welcome people, which itself would be a huge change, because when you think about it, a lot of cities across the country look at this now as, quote, a problem. It's not a problem. It's a demographic shift. We have two big immigrations happening in Canada today. One of them is from outside the country, and the other one is from inside the country. And the big demographic shift inside the country is people coming not necessarily for all time, but coming to say, well, this is part of my Canada as well, and this is where I need to get some services. And that's what's going to happen. And we shouldn't see it as abnormal or something that's a failure on somebody's part. It's not because, it's just because the way the world is changing, this is going to happen. And I think we really have to embrace it as saying, what an extraordinary opportunity we have. For the first time, we have the chance to learn about who we are as a country. We have the first chance to really engage with our fellow citizens. We have a chance to celebrate the real nature of the country and what we've all become. We're no longer living in far distances apart, but coming together. And the other thing that's happening is the frontier is going north, so we're coming together in another way as well, which also can be seen as a problem or it can be seen as an opportunity. But we really have to welcome it, and we're not doing it, because whether it's, and institutions are wrestling with it, school boards are starting to understand it, colleges and universities are engaging, but we don't have the housing programs, we don't have the education programs, we don't have the support systems, and we don't have ways of really allowing people to celebrate who they are and to live their lives in cities as a perfectly legitimate part of who they are. And that is something we really have to do. And I think it's, you know, the way a lot of governments are responding to this right now, and certainly at the federal level, is to say, let's create more laws that throw more people in jail. And we're making exactly the same mistake that the Americans have made with their prison system, where there's now nearly 3 million people who are in jail in the United States. It has the highest level of incarceration of any country in the world, including China, Iran, name any dictatorship. America has more people in jail than any of those countries. It's per capita. And they have them in jail because they've created a criminal justice system that just forces and flows people into that system right away. And we're doing the same thing in Canada. Minimum sentencing, no alternatives. We haven't paid any attention to the alternative sentencing provisions in the criminal code which would allow us to use healing circles and other things. None of that stuff's being used. And so it's a tough situation. So we have to change it, and we have to discuss it. We have to get it out on the table as an issue for the country, because it's a huge issue for Canada.
Yeah. You reference social problems, Bob, and the challenges that Aboriginal people face when they end up in cities and towns like here and pretty much every city and urban center in Canada. There's been a significant influx of Aboriginal people, and most face the same challenges, whether it's poor housing or poor access to decent housing, education opportunities that are in the main pretty much absent in a lot of these families.
Go ahead.
And high unemployment and a whole litany of challenges. Well, governments, I think, it's incumbent upon governments to reach out more effectively than they have up to now with the Aboriginal communities that are emerging in urban centers. And the best place to start, in my view, is places like this. I think this is the most effective incubator, if I can put it that way, of new thinking, new approaches, a more inclusive way of dealing with peoples, particularly Aboriginal people. Because if we fail in our schools and in our colleges and universities, there isn't much hope for a better life for all of us.
Oh, thank you. Do I see Maggie have a question for us? Oh, please. That'd be great.
Hi. Hi.
Yep, we can hear you.
My name is Maggie Sophia. I'm a student here at the college. I'm taking film production, and I'm also from Nibinamik First Nations. The struggles I faced this year is my last year of film production, is that there was a lack of funding in my community, in all communities. And we had to think of something else to get more funding for me for this last year. So I had to go on OSAP. And yeah, it's been a very struggling, like I thought as soon as they told me that I wouldn't get any funding, like I just kind of broke down. Like I didn't want this to happen, and then I graciously found people to help me to find other ways to get more funding. And I believe like in the communities now, there's more people that want to be in the education system. And there's a wait list going on. And yeah, and I believe there should be like more funding for people that are in, that are taking education more seriously in their lives. And yeah, and I just want to say that I really appreciate that you guys are supporting Aboriginal people for education just like me. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Maggie, very much. Well, thank you, Maggie, very much. I think we have one final question out here, and then we'll need to wrap up.
Just
Sorry.
a note in response to Maggie's point. There shouldn't be a cap on the transfers to First Nations for higher education. That's a real thing we need to get rid of, and that's the cap that's forced you into in a sense, into the provincial system. But having said that, the provincial system needs to ensure that anybody who wants to go to college or university, who's qualified to go to college or university, should be able to go. And we need to make sure that the people who are going are not going too far into debt in order to be able to manage their education. And that is a principle that we need to recommit to all the time. And I really appreciate your question, and I appreciate your being here today. Thank you very much for that. Miigwech, thank you.
Rich, very much. One final question, and I'm going to ask Katie to come forward and thank our speakers.
Hi, I'm from New Brunswick, so honestly I didn't know you guys until today. But I am aware of the fracking issue in New Brunswick, and I had to go off Facebook on Sunday because I was getting too emotionally involved in everything that was happening there. I'm really saddened because I just returned from 8 months being in India, which is a developing country, and I returned home to all of these things happening in our country. And I'm taking sociology, and for the first time in my life, I'm learning about the history of Native people. And I have become so sad and so angry that our country has done this for so long. And I actually apologized to a couple of people in my class because they're Native. And I have had those prejudices, and I feel like I've been a victim of the education system because we did not learn this information in school. And I can only imagine the pain that everybody has gone through. And if I could just speak to an issue that I feel is even more pressing than education, and that is the water issue. Water is a human right. The UN defined years ago, they declared that access to clean and healthy water is a human right all around the world, and Canada has refused to acknowledge that. They actually fight against it, they oppose it, they will not acknowledge it for, I'm sure there's economic reasons. But I think that because that is such a crucial issue to life, I think that needs to be addressed, because if people don't have access to clean and healthy water in this country, how are they going to even make it to high school so that they can get an education and then go on to post-secondary education? And as a health professional, I know you need more than 2 liters of water a day to survive, and that's all that these people are be providing if they even get that. And I think that that is sick, and I think that's something that is such a huge issue. It needs to be addressed, and I would like to hear what you have to say about that. Thank you.
Water is fundamental to our existence, and it's a safe drinking water, or access to safe drinking water in First Nation communities is a major challenge. I believe this number to be true, but there are at least 130 First Nation communities that operate under a boil water advisory and have for many years, right? And so that means that these communities don't have access to safe drinking water, right? And in addition, these communities that are now expected to fix this problem weren't responsible in the first place for creating this situation. And here again, money is a problem, right? And what we're talking about here is one of the manifestations of poverty, First Nations poverty, Canada's biggest challenge. So we're going to have to come to grips with this situation before it becomes absolutely impossible to fix, right? And we are still, I think, in a good position, in a strong position to address these challenges. But it requires a full commitment and support of every government, of every political stripe in the country. That's one point. I agree, and I personally believe this to be so, and I've said this many times. The next major battleground in this country will be over water, right? And we're going to have to figure out the status of water, right? Whether it's a human right, whether it's an indigenous right, in the same way that we regard land as a First Nations right or an Aboriginal right. Because so far, our understanding of water and the right to water has been dismissed, right? And the closest we ever came, I believe, to making a determination over this notion of the right to water, right, is over the Old Man River situation in Alberta with the Piikani First Nation that brought suit against 2 levels of government. In the end, there was an out-of-court settlement, right? So up to this point, it's still an unresolved matter, right? Different from the situation in the United States. And so we're going to have to come to grips with this issue sometime soon.
Bob?
Just briefly, 2 things. 20 years ago, I signed an agreement with the federal government to ensure that there would be effective water treatment facilities in every reserve in the province of Ontario. So we moved to do that and to make a provincial contribution to what was going on, even though technically we didn't have to, but my view was if we didn't make a provincial contribution, it wouldn't happen, so we had to do that. As I now go back and talk to people, one of the things that we need to look at is we've got to make sure we've got the people who can maintain the capital that's on reserve, maintain the equipment that's there, maintain and service it, and make sure that we can afford, that the affordability is there. We're now 20 years after many of that equipment's been put in. You've got to renew the equipment, you've got to put it in again, you've got to make it even better. So there's some really practical things we need to do. We do have the structure, the infrastructure, and the agreements between the federal government and the provinces to make sure it happens. And the other thing is, when I was leader of the Liberal Party in Ottawa during the last couple of years, I did move a private member's motion to make the principle of safe drinking water and running water something that's every community should have access to, and it was passed unanimously. The Conservatives at the last minute decided to vote in favor of it, and then they announced their own strategy to try to implement it. But the problem is not the regulations, the problem is the money and the resources, but it's also making sure that we're building the capacity on reserve to maintain the equipment and to service the equipment so that it doesn't, you're not simply waiting for somebody else to come in and fix it. And that's what we need to really embrace and make sure is actually happening. So that's a serious challenge for us.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. As I 10 minutes ago or more, the time has gone quickly, and the final 10 minutes even more so that's here. It's now my honor to call upon the President of the Student Union of Confederation College to thank you for being here today. Katie.
I would like to say thank you to Bob Rae and Phil Fontaine for coming onto our campus and speaking to not just our students, but our community at the college as well as community-wide. So thank you again for coming onto our campus. I know that each one of us will come away today with the benefit of hearing all of these important discussions. So again, thank you.
Very good. Well, we do need to wrap this up. I know there's some opportunities here to speak to the media, and we'll have a few minutes of individuals wish to chat with Phil and Bob as well. But thank you very much to all of you for being here today. Very much. Very well done.